So welcome everybody to this really exciting event. My name is Hyshyama Hamin. I am from the island of Sri Lanka. I'm the coordinator for the Campaign for Justice in Muslim Family Laws at Musawah, and I will be co-moderating today's event along with Humay Abdulghafoor from Maldives. We have people from all over the world and multiple time zones. We're really honored that you could join us today. We hope that wherever you're joining from, that you and your families are safe and healthy. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping announcements. You know the drill. We've been a part of multiple webinars of this nature. So this is a public event and it's scheduled for 1.5 hours. It's also live streamed on Musawah's Facebook page. The recording will be posted on Musawah's YouTube channel and will be available on Musawah's Facebook following the event. The session will be in English and Arabic interpretation is available. Just click on the globe button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and that says interpretation and switch to the Arabic channel. Our wonderful interpreter, Sulaf and Dina, will be assisting you today. Participants on Zoom will be muted, but if you are joining us via Zoom, please ask questions throughout the session via our Q&A function on Zoom, and also via the comments function if you're following us on Facebook Live. Our colleagues will be posting resources depending on what the speakers will be speaking about, and they'll be posting it on the Zoom chat as well as Facebook Live comments section. The latter on Facebook will be available after the event, so the resources can be accessed there, even if you have missed anything on the Zoom platform. So moving on very swiftly to today's event, I just want to very briefly mention a little bit about the Campaign for Justice in Muslim Family Laws. For those of you who are familiar with Musawah's work, you will know that over the past decade, Musawah has been working on knowledge building, capacity building, and international advocacy. And we've also been doing research and developing critical evidence and information about Muslim family laws around the world, and especially how they're impacting Muslim women and girls. And when we look at Muslim family laws in over 33 countries based on our research, we know that Muslim women and girls are affected by discriminatory provisions, procedures, and practices during the time of entry into marriage, in the course of marriage, so during marriage, as well as at the time of divorce. But that is not the full picture. Through our work, we've also gotten to know and connect with and be inspired by Muslim women from around the world, some of whom are on your screens today, who are at the forefront of really bettering the lives and bettering the laws for women within their own communities and countries. They're working with survivors on a daily basis. They're trying to build knowledge and courage among their own groups, and they are demanding that their governments address the lived realities of Muslim families. And it is this historic sisterhood, really, of Muslim women from around the world fighting for and advocating for justice and equality that led us to launch the Campaign for Justice. It is a campaign led by Muslim women for our own issues, and we are standing from within our faith in order to advocate for a just and egalitarian family law that applies to all of us. So, the Campaign for Justice was launched in May 2020, and this was in the beginning months of the pandemic. And of course, throughout the past year, we've witnessed social media platforms booming with innovative tools and innovative ways to have conversations. And so we have this Standing for Justice Digital Activism series, which we kick off today. And it is a multi-platform series that have been co-created by national advocates as well as the Musawah team to really have the conversation about advocacy, activism for Muslim family law reforms within our own context. So here we are, episode 1, launching of the Standing for Justice digital series. The story, there's a very unique story behind the name of Standing for Justice, which if you hang out with us until the end of the webinar, I will definitely mention it to you during one of our segments. But we have an incredible lineup of activists from India, Malaysia, and South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Maldives, who have been working on discriminatory family laws and practices in their own context. Today, we'll be using a very unique format called Anger, Hope, and Action. And it's a conversational tool that was developed within labor movements in the past. And it's basically inviting people to go from the journey of anger and issues towards hope and opportunities in our contexts and communities towards action. So we will have today's format. The format of today's event will be divided into these 3 segments. So now to introduce my wonderful moderator, co-moderator, Humay Abdulghafoor, who will then introduce our speakers. Humay is an independent social researcher from the Maldives. She is a co-founder of a women's rights organization called UTEMA in the Maldives. And she volunteers for citizens-led environmental protection group, Save the Maldives campaign. She's worked with and continues to work with NGOs, INGOs, government institutions, as well as UN agencies, and is interested in civic activism, media, politics, governance systems, and also policies and laws affecting the lived experiences of women in the Maldives. So over to you, Humay. I'm just going to pull up a slide to introduce our speakers. If you can kindly put on your mics, that would be great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words and the kind introduction, Ish. Let me move on to introduce our speakers today. We have 4 fantastic change makers who has been working really hard to change the situations in their countries. Firstly, let me introduce to you Ayesha Royker, who is a candidate attorney completing her article of clerkship in South Africa. Ayesha is an activist and the chairperson of the Muslim Personal Law Network, the MPL network, advocating for the recognition and regulation of Muslim marriages in South Africa. Ayesha's personal struggle for her rights has made her a passionate leader on the rights of women and youth in her community. Welcome, Ayesha. Next, we have Ermiza Tegal, who is an attorney at law practicing before the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. She leads a feminist chambers in a practice in public law and family law, which works especially with victims, survivors of torture and domestic violence. Ermiza is also a co-founder of the Muslim Personal Law Reforms Action Group, MPL-RAG, pushing for reforms of the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act in Sri Lanka. It's so good to have you with us, Ermiza. Next, I'd like to introduce Noorjehan Safia Niaz, who is the co-founder of Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan, or BMMA, a movement of Muslim women in India that has worked consistently in the areas of Muslim family law, reform, education, health, security, and livelihood by encouraging and facilitating the leadership of Muslim women. Welcome, Noorjehan. And then I'd like to introduce Rozana Isa, who I think many of you will need no introduction to, who is the Executive Director for Sisters in Islam, an NGO working on women's rights within the framework of Islam. She joined the Malaysian women's rights movement in 1999, working to address violence against women. This exposed her to the challenges women face to have their rights recognized and exercised in a complex context in Malaysia. So welcome all 4 of our speakers. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today. Over to you, Hyshyama.
Thank you so much, Humay. Great, let's start this event. So we'll start with the segment on anger, which is basically looking at what are some of the issues that are affecting Muslim women in our context, particularly when it comes to family law reform, family laws and practices. And just to set some pace for us, let's start with the countries that have codified Muslim family laws, which is Sri Lanka and Malaysia. So Rozana and Ermiza, if you could set the context for us a little bit in your respective countries. What is the nature of codified Muslim family laws in your countries? What are the main issues impacting Muslim women under this family law? Let's start with you, Rozana.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes, very well.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Musawah, for organizing this. I think the campaign for justice is something that's very much needed. And I'm very happy to also be able to share Malaysia's experience with regards to Muslim family laws. And the context that we are in, we are basically a country that has parallel legal systems. We have the Islamic family laws specifically for Muslims, and for this is pertaining to the personal laws. And then we have the Marriage and Divorce Laws, Law Reform Act for those who aren't Muslims. And what is very interesting about the Malaysian context is that we're not dealing with just one particular family law. Yeah, because we have 14 different states, essentially we actually have 14 different Islamic family laws for each state. So the laws are codified. They are similar from one state to another. There's some, differences, perhaps, but perhaps very minor differences. And some of the challenges that, is being faced by the women is actually, in terms of whether, if, for example, there's the issue of custody, there's the issue of divorce, and so on and so forth, like if there's a court order, how do you actually get a court order enforced, from one state to another, because it very much, is tied to the jurisdiction of the state that it's in. And so you would have to actually get court orders, to have it applied to another, court orders to be applied to another state. So, and what is also interesting, for example, it creates a lot of hurdles for women, and it also creates opportunities for men, So, for example, I would say in the issue of polygamy, yeah. So for some of the states, they would actually have very strict conditions that needs to be fulfilled. If you apply to the court to get into a polygamous marriage, you will have to comply to these conditions. But if the court doesn't allow you, on whatever grounds, they find that, you're unfit to be in a polygamous marriage, if you're a man, all you have to do is actually to cross a border to another state where, the conditions for polygamy may not be so strict. And so this is where the loophole is for men, and which is why, when you talk about the problems, the issues of polygamy in Malaysia is very much rampant, because, there's so much injustice that women and children are facing, because husbands are just not keeping up, to establish a marriage where, there's fairness, there's justice. So there's all kinds of sufferings that's actually going on under polygamous marriage. And on top of that, if any of the Malaysian states don't allow you to get into a polygamous marriage, what you can also do is actually to cross the border to the borders of Thailand, between Malaysia and Thailand. You can actually cross the borders and also get married there. And this also actually creates a lot of injustice for the polygamous, the subsequent marriages, because you will actually have to fulfill certain things legally when you come back. You need to register your marriage in order for it to be recognized. However, a lot of marriages, husbands don't register the marriages. One of the things that's also very troubling, the fact that the fines for violating some of these laws, for marrying getting to a polygamous marriage without permission, the fines are really minimal. And you're talking about, it's really, people rather just like break the law, violate the law, and then pay the fines rather than actually adhering to the law. So there's all these, core issues that we really need to address in terms of, how the laws are just so easily, there's so many loopholes. It creates so many, unjust situations for women, for children, and therefore these are some of the issues we need to be tackling. There's about 10 seconds. I just want to say that, during the pandemic, what we found quite interesting was the fact that, the reasons, because we've been monitoring what do you call this, statistics. We have a legal helpline. We've been monitoring the cases. And what we found was that the reasons for divorce during the time of the pandemic, it actually differs from the previous years. So, for example, previously, for example, the top reason, 23% top reason for divorce is domestic violence. Second, what do you call this? Second item is actually on the issue of husbands not providing maintenance. That's the second reason at 18%. Infidelity is at 14%. And then for the first time ever, this has never happened before, the top 4 reasons for divorce is actually in terms of finance and polygamy, because during the pandemic, actually wives discovered, that their husbands have actually entered into other marriages, because before this, they just didn't know. So all kinds of, issues are actually spilling out over the pandemic. So these are some of the, issues that, I just wanted to share, and maybe I can share some more later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rozana. Yes, indeed. I think the pandemic has certainly exacerbated some of the underlying inequalities in family laws, is what we're seeing across contexts. Same question to you, Ermiza, if you could lay the groundwork for us a bit, please.
Sure. So in Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan Muslim family law is part of one of maybe 3 other personal laws that are there. So we have the Kandyan personal law. We have the Piecemeal, which applies to the Jaffna Tamils. So on this aspect of the law, there is personal laws that apply to particular communities, and Sri Lankan Muslim law falls into that. We've had the Sri Lankan Muslim family law codified since as far back as the 1920s, and there has been a semi-formal Qazi system that administers the law in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka has had codified Muslim family law for the longest of times. And the current law that we have, which is the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act, which I will refer to as the MMDA, is from 1951. It has seen no substantive reforms since 1951, although women, particularly women's groups, have called for reform. So many committees have looked into it, so many recommendations, no change. So experiences of particularly women paint a dire situation of exclusion, discrimination, hardship, and of course, as Rozana spoke, violence. It fails to acknowledge the modern day problems of the Sri Lankan Muslim woman. So when we look at the issues, we look at also the substantive law problems that Muslim women face, and then the procedural aspects that Muslim women face, right? So on the substantive aspects, starting from the point of marriage, we know that Muslim women are excluded from even signing their marriage documents. As a result, they also do not participate in their marriage ceremony, the official part of the marriage ceremony, more the sort of cultural part, but not the actual event at which they sign their marriage register. And as a result, they are denied the right to consent to marriage. So male members of their family usually consenting on their behalf. There are very many unregistered marriages as a result of marriage not mandatorily needing registration to be lawfully recognized in Sri Lanka, leading to other problems where there are children and then those children are not able to access state services as a result of the marriage not being registered. They also have, at the point of marriage itself, the issue of minimum age, where even under the age of 12, the Muslim children in Sri Lanka are permitted to marry with the permission of the Qazi. So there is no minimum age in Sri Lanka for marriage. The permission of polygamy, the fact that polygamy is permitted, has led to abandonment of wives, non-maintenance of families, and violence if they want to get rid of the first family to move on to the second family and live with the second wife. These are the stories that we are hearing. Practice of dowry has left, which is unacceptable in Islam, but is practiced widely in the community, has left women and their families losing their assets, losing their property to the husbands, and thereafter, once the divorce is done, they cannot recover those properties. So that's at the point of marriage. Then at the point of divorce, we have a whole host of other problems that they face, issues. As a result of sect-based procedures, some women belonging to a minority sect are unable to divorce without the permission of their husband. There are unequal divorce procedures for men and women. So what we mean by that is that, for example, men, when they get a divorce in Sri Lanka under the Qazi court system, they don't have, nobody can appeal that. So women can't appeal that decision. But when women initiate and get a divorce, the man can appeal. So what happens, and very many stories we hear, the man appeals that divorce and then says, and then also uses the permission for polygamy to marry a second time, where the woman is kept waiting until the finishing of this appeal, which takes years and years and years, right? There's no provision for mata, so there's no alimony that is paid, no provision to look after the future of this woman who is divorced, no acknowledgement of matrimonial property, and really unjust practices in relation to property. I'm just going to take like 30 seconds to talk about the administrative space, to say that women are not heard, and that we've carried out surveys, conducted studies. Women don't feel heard within the Qazi space. It's dominated by men. There are hostilities, there is verbal abuse, there is discrimination. In fact, the Qazi will often tell a woman, you are not part of your marriage, so therefore you really can't even take forward this divorce procedure. We would like your father to come in and conduct the divorce procedure on your behalf as well. So all of these issues mean that women face, including and over and above that, because Qazis are not qualified and not trained and not supervised. Corruption is another issue, unjust orders, lack of knowledge of the law, so many things that keep adding up. And as I keep speaking, I feel that the burden that keeps like an avalanche keeps adding up on women, Muslim women in Sri Lanka. So that's just a really broad spectrum set of issues that Muslim women in Sri Lanka face under the MMDA.
Thank you so much, Ermiza. I think you also alluded to a point, which is that one woman could potentially face multiple of these issues as well, which I think is a conversation we'll be having in the next segment in terms of, whether law reform should be a one issue approach, or is it more worthwhile to pursue multiple issues of reform, for example, because women do end up facing multiple issues within the course of a marriage, life cycle, if we need to call it such for some cases at least. So moving on to countries with uncodified Muslim family laws, two very diverse countries, India and South Africa. So Noorjehan and Ayesha, both India and South Africa do not have codified Muslim family law, unlike Sri Lanka and Malaysia. But many discriminatory practices exist, as you've mentioned previously and also through your work. Can you help us set some context for your respective countries, and particularly on the nature of the practices, and what are the issues that you are picking up as some of the main ones that are affecting Muslim women for your context? If we can start with Noorjehan and then move to Ayesha, that would be great.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Musawah for again bringing in this issue, such a important issue, and getting all of us together to discuss this. Just to get a hang of where we are in terms of Muslim family law reform today. The first law was passed in 1937, okay, which talked about the fact that Sharia is going to be made applicable to the Muslims in India. So it gave a call for codification, and it gave a call for the fact that Muslims now onwards will not be governed by their customary practices, but by the Sharia. It was immediately followed by another law in 1939, which gave Muslim women the right to divorce in the court of law. And so we were moving in the right direction. Had the partition not happened, we would have probably gone ahead and had further reforms within the law. But if you look at the trajectory, and if you look at the milestones, so 37 followed by 1939, and the third law came in 1986, which is almost like a 50-year gap between the two legislations. And this again was piecemeal, because it just said that post-divorce, Muslim women will be entitled to maintenance. Okay, so that little bit of a law that we got. And after 1986, we have a law that has come in now 2 years back, which prohibits instant divorce. So if you take this trajectory forward, if in the next 16 years we don't get a law in place, piecemeal or comprehensive, then we will have 1 century of timeline where Muslim women in India will not be being governed by any kind of law, except for these small pieces, bits and pieces that have been thrown to us over decades, earlier by the British government and after independence by the later governments that have come to power. This is just to see that it has taken us a century, and yet after 100 years we are nowhere close to a codified family law. And even now we are thrown these bits and pieces at us, like, as if we are out there waiting for these pieces to fall in our lap, and so that we can take our lives forward. Now that's the kind of purposeful neglect, I would say, purposeful neglect of the issue, and complete political inefficiency and political unwillingness to address the issue by various governments that have come in and gone. For instance, if I have to put it down to specific laws that have been passed, we have the Qazis Act of 1880. And the best of lawyers in our country today have no idea what's happening to that law. Because if that law would be active, then Muslim Qazis whom BMMA has trained would be able to register ourselves. But nobody knows where to do, what to go, where to register. The Hindu law has been codified way back in 1955. That means the entire Hindu community, which includes the minorities, Sikhs, Jains, and the Buddhists, are governed by a comprehensively codified law based on their religion. The Christians and the Parsis, who are such a small minority, also have their own law. But we are 150 million Muslims in India, which, if you look at the population of Muslim women, then we are close to 80 million. And 80 million Muslim women do not have the legal protection within their own country. And this is despite the fact that we have a secular law also in place. We have the Special Marriages Act, which all Indians can opt out of their family laws. They can opt out of their personal laws and get married under the Special Marriage Act. And once you do that, then you are given the protection of the secular legislations that have happened. Even if I don't opt out of the Sharia law, I still, as a citizen of the country, can opt for these legislations and ask for protection under it. For example, the Sharia allows polygamy, but I can invoke the Indian Penal Code under Section 494 and ask for and register my complaint against my polygamous husband. But point is, how many of us know about it? And secondly, even if I know about it, and if I reach out to the government itself will be very, very reluctant to take in my complaint, because it seems that we are not governed by this legislation. We are governed by our own personal laws. So I am a Muslim, but I'm not a citizen. So my citizenship personality is juxtaposed against my being a Muslim. So if I am governed by the Sharia, then it is by default that I'm not governed by certain other secular proactive and protective legislations, which I'm entitled to as a citizen. So this dichotomy and then this gap between who am I as a Muslim, my faith, and my protections that exist as a citizen. If the state and the governments and the Supreme Courts do not work on this very basic ideological lacuna that we have, Muslim women will continue to be at the receiving end. So right now, we don't have a legislation, a codified law against, say, polygamy, against the practice of halala, against muta marriages, against underage marriages. There is no legislation which guides inheritance aspects. There is no legislation for adoption of children. There is nothing that guides custody of children. So there is the Sharia application should have been codified, and the Sharia aspects of the entire Muslim family law should have been turned into a legislation way back in 1937. It has not happened. And we right now are asking for a comprehensive legislation. Our draft law is ready. We've been working on it for the last 7 years. It's in the public domain since the last 7 years. And nobody in the government feels the need to pick it up and legislate for us. And so over the last 1 century, we've got these bits and pieces of legislations coming our way. And now the issues, as Ermiza also said, they're the same. Underage marriages, polygamous marriages, no protection within the secular legislations that we already have. So while we assert ourselves as citizens, we also want a totally, completely, comprehensively codified Muslim family law.
Thank you so much, Noorjehan. I think you really set the stage for the next segment as well, which we will talk a bit more when we get to the segment on hope and what some of the work has been around that. But firstly, to Ayesha, to lay down some of the groundwork, or rather the context in South Africa. And also if you can mention a bit about some of the recent things that have been happening. You might want to keep it for the next segment as well, but in relation with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ish, and thanks for this opportunity. I think it's important that we continue this discussion. So, with regards to South Africa, we are a democratic country. We have a constitution that's the supreme law of the land. And in terms of the constitution, there should be equality for all citizens. However, the laws, family laws, or the legislation that there currently is, do not include religious marriages. So, as a result, Muslim, Hindu, Jewish marriages are not included, and we have had to, there is a little bit of recognition now, but that has come through strategic litigation over more than 20 years, even just to get a spouse married in terms of Muslim marriages recognized as a spouse for, inheritance, and access to maintenance and the like. So because there's no legal framework which govern our marriages, religious bodies are relied upon to offer guidance. So the state looks, people turn to various organizations. In Cape Town, we have the Muslim Judicial Council. In various parts of the countries, we have Jamiats. These organizations are male-led bodies, and they practice on an ad hoc basis. So there's different rulings depending which area you live in. And it causes a lot of uncertainty for our women and children. Lots of times, some of the issues that the women have come across when we do approach these religious bodies, they're loath to, assist with talaq or fasakh, and women get told to go back home and sabr. And a lot of times they are subjected to various forms of abuse at home, and that's not considered, a reason for granting a fasakh, for example. Another issue that Muslim women have is that when we do go to these religious bodies, they are unable to, they don't have any legal authority to enforce any of our Islamic rights. So you will go to them, for example, they will advise the husband, you must nafaqah, you must do this, you must do that. But to actually enforce those rights, it's sometimes very difficult. Because there's no religious framework which governs our marriage, we women struggle with access to justice, access to the court. The whole process takes very long, and it's costly. So even if you do litigate or you do take this matter to court, you're not guaranteed of a favorable outcome. And, it is very expensive. So the ordinary woman out there, you have to decide, do you litigate and spend your money in litigation, or do you go out and work and, earn some money to put food on the table because your husband's not paying maintenance? So we do have the option of registering a civil marriage, but it is a separate process. So you can either have your nikah and then enter into a civil marriage, or we have Muslim marriage officers who can perform a civil and the Islamic marriage simultaneously. And I'm proud to say that 2 of the 3 female Muslim marriage officers in South Africa are part of the MPL network. So we as a network, so those are some of the things that the women are finding really difficulty in getting, the husband holds this talaq over your head, and if he doesn't want to give you a talaq, then he doesn't have to give you a talaq. So a lot of women have quite often in recent years have been turning to the option of a khula, and as a means of getting out of this marriage. But we struggle to align our Islamic laws and the secular laws and cultural requirements. So those are, just some, a tip of the iceberg of the issues that women are facing. But as Rozana has mentioned, we have also found in South Africa during the pandemic a lot of abuse, being heightened because of the lack of support and a lack of rights and access to justice. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Ayesha. I think it's always so mind-boggling to me that, a family is a space where, usually attributed to safety, security, the first kind of relationships you develop are within family. But unfortunately, that's where, particularly when it comes to Muslim families, that's where the injustice, the discrimination seems to be concentrated. And it's really difficult to reconcile as a Muslim woman as well. And particularly if you're going through these issues, you have really struggled in terms of what your faith says are your rights and what really, come out in practice. And I think all of you have brought up some really critical issues. Spicing things up a little bit in terms of conversation and discussion. Humay and I will like to open up, for a round of what we call popcorn, it's a style of conversation called popcorn style. So please feel free to jump in. We'll be just asking a few questions, but also questions if you have for each other. But just as an opener, while Humay picks up some questions that have come through chat, I want to, and feel free anyone to jump in really, basically why would community leaders or our governments think that they can get away with allowing discrimination of this nature to continue? Who is benefiting from this discrimination? If you could respond to that. Can we start with Rozana? I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I think the first in the first place, we're talking about, what is it that we understand about marriage in Islam? I think the whole framework, the whole Islamic family law framework, falls upon, the notion that, men are the head of the households, men are the head of the families, you need to obey them. And, there's wives are penalized if you are disobedient to them. Wives rarely have a say in the matter. And I think the whole family law framework, is actually based on that unequal relationship between the two spouses. And I think because of that, because culturally and the understanding that we have that this is what marriage in Islam looks like, I think it just, that kind of value and outlook, is embedded within lawmaking as well, which is why it's really very hard then, because essentially when you deal with the law, you want to raise, the women's rights. You want women to be recognized as equals, within the marriage, that they are able to get access to justice. But then, you also, even if you have because Malaysian lawyers especially, they like to say, oh, but Malaysia actually has, the best laws. And at one point, we probably did have the best laws. But at the end of the day, if you are going to court and you're coming across, the cultural biases, the understanding that, women should not be challenging, you need to be patient, you need to be sabar. This is your lot in life. What more do you want? And injustice will just continue to perpetuate, even with the best kinds of law reforms. So I think there needs to be a shift both in law as well as in culture as well, in the ways that we appreciate Islam and what it means in terms of marriage. So I'll end there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, who's benefiting? Who's not benefiting is certainly not the women and children. We're not benefiting. So, yes, we are living in a society where women, husbands and wives or spouses are expected to contribute equally to the home. So women are expected to work, but upon the dissolution of the marriage, then you get told, no, Muslim marriages are out of community of property. So if you as a woman haven't registered anything or don't have any assets in your name after 19 years or 20 years, whatever, of marriage, you're left with nothing. And, that's the discrimination against women. You're contributing. What is the value? How do you put a value to the work that a mother does in the home? That's just not considered. So certainly in my experience personally, and from the work, that we do, the cases that we see, women are not benefiting. And the children are being hard done. And that's the saddest part, that the children have to suffer for decisions made by the parents.
Ermiza, Noorjehan, Humay, I would say the patriarchy is benefiting, certainly.
Yeah.
No, I would say yes. The law and the customs and the practices that are clearly so much in favor of men. So we know who's benefiting. But men have also organized themselves along the lines of religion, very, very smart and very, very strategic. And they have taken over the institutions of religion. And they have taken over for themselves the right to read, interpret, disseminate their version of what Islam is. And they've very cleverly done that, because religion means a lot to all of us. Faith is important. And when something is driven into my head based on what supposedly my faith says, then I would accept it without challenging it. And that's where I think as Muslim women also, we got caught in that trap. And we did not really question those religious leaders or those men who kept throwing this on our faces all the time. And that is what is also now changing, given what Musawah is doing and all of us are doing. We are really reclaiming our religion back to what it says for us and what it means to me and how it can benefit me. I think that language, that what it is giving it to me and what is there in it for me and what's the benefit that I need to claim from it. I think that's where we are going, and I think we are in the right direction.
And we're teaching our children, we're teaching the next generation, and that's where the change is going to come, because the change starts with us in our home. So by teaching, I've got 3 sons, by teaching my sons a certain way, to treat the women or to treat their wives with justice, kindness, fairness, equity, that's going to be perpetuated. That's the legacy I would like to leave.
Yeah.
Sort of jumping into that, I just want to say I really very much appreciate all the feedback on that question, because it's very much the same in Sri Lanka. And I think just the experiences of talking to women and my own experiences, it's that power trip. It's that ability to hold power over somebody else and say, you don't talk, this is my space. So we see that in whether it's a Qazi imposing that power over women, whether it's in the family, the male head of household assuming that role of head of household, exercising, you don't have a decision, you don't have power to decide, you do what I tell you, I feel like king. And then we see the same thing replicated in our community spaces, mosque committees deciding over the futures, the lives of people, and feeling, I don't know whether they feel good about themselves, whether they feel better about themselves, but certainly that power trip. And then all the way up to political office, representatives of the people, those who are able to give and those who are able to provide solutions to people, assuming office more as I have the power, I can decide, I will bargain your rights away for votes, for me to be popular, for me to be the man. So many ways in which I am better than women, I'm better than the problems that are brought to me. So I really do think power plays such a large role, and those feelings associated with power is something that we see benefiting those who hold us back.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to share because in 2019, Sisters in Islam had published a national survey on the personal and public rights of Muslim women in the Muslim women in Malaysia, because we wanted to gauge their understanding about gender equality. And so that, this is where, the idea and understanding of equality is there in public. They understand their rights within the public sphere. They also understand their rights within the family. I think there are expectations, they have laid out quite clearly what their expectations are. But in terms of actually, exercising and claiming those rights that they are aware of, there is still something that's stopping them from doing so. And I think this is something, we need to figure out how to overcome for women, because for them, I think we're in the generation where I think everyone is aware that there is this thing called gender equality, and you can have it out there. But how do you actually bring that within the personal, within the family sphere? That is something I think that we've got to work on for the women, especially, that it's okay that you're doing this. It's okay for you to claim your rights. You're not going to go to hell, for deciding that I've had enough with domestic violence. I think, there needs to be a way for us to have further conversations on this.
Humay, do we have any questions from chat?
Yes, I was just about to do that when I was thrown out, so I'm back in. I have a little bit of connectivity issue here. Yes, there is actually a question to Ermiza from one of the speakers, Rivka. And they'd like to know if there has been an increase during the COVID-19 pandemic of the issue of child marriages. Because we all know in all our contexts, COVID really showed up all the gaps, even in the opened up and exposed all these injustices that much more. So, Ermiza, over to you if you could just speak.
Thanks, Humay. I think I'm in a difficulty only because we don't have the data. There was so much conversation during the COVID related restrictions about women not being able to access maintenance, women not being able to access services, or then also finding out that their husbands had second marriages, domestic violence. All of those issues were on the rise. So many queries, so many reaching out for legal advice as well. But as was previously the case, there is no way for us to find out whether child marriages, for example, increased, whether polygamous marriages, for example, increased, and what those numbers are. There's no documentation. Sometimes we find that when there is a child marriage, there is a tendency also to falsify documentation and increase the age. So that has been one of the stumbling blocks in terms of gathering data. Although sort of anecdotally, I can tell you we were doing a survey during this time, and one of the survey participants had told the survey data collector, we are going to try and sort out this young child's wedding because the law might change soon, and we want to have her married off young, which was this really horrific sort of response that you have to deal with and saying people are even trying to subvert. It may have been a one-off instance, but certainly that mentality, that attitude was something that we took away as something that we need to think about.
Thank you for that. And actually, to Noorjehan also, there is one of the viewers have posed a few questions actually. One being, how can we raise our demands? In what ways can we raise our demands for the codification of Muslim personal laws in the Indian context? And does PMMA support these reforms within the community? It's a whole host of questions, but I think I'll leave that with you to respond, Noorjehan.
Also, Noorjehan, the next segment is on this, so perhaps we can keep it for the hope segment because we will be now getting into What are the opportunities, codified, comprehensive, etc.? So whoever asked the question, please do bear with us. We will be getting to all of this in just a bit. I will hand over. So this is us being intentional about the different segments. I'm handing over the mic to Humay for the next segment, which is on hope, because we do also want to front some of the context, some of the work that we are doing, that activists and advocates are doing towards reform as well. So Humay, over to you for the segment on hope.
Thank you, Ayesha. I hope the sound is okay. I think there was a problem with my sound.
It's a little tricky. If you could just move it slightly towards the lips, that would be great.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so basically, in the initial segment that Hyshyama has covered with our speakers, we know that the context has been set. These are the issues that have mobilized everyone to come out in response. We know that women have been mobilizing in response to these lived realities, stemming from the talked about patriarchy, the notable rise of impossible patriarchal and fundamentalist interpretations of Islamic scriptures and traditions, which are really having profoundly negative impacts on the lives of women and families. So we are very well aware of the great work that Sisters in Islam has done in Malaysia, which has been instrumental in bringing up these issues. And you've been leading that movement for justice and equality for women in the Malaysian context. And of course, Musawah has been taking the leadership and taking this to the global level, which what brings us here today. Something has to be done, and people are not waiting. As we can tell, it is being done in different ways by different people. We've just been discussing just how badly things go wrong, about the child marriage, the impunity with which many of the decision makers, exploit the interpretations that the patriarchal interpretations that actually invisibilize women. When I listen to Ayesha as well, I get the sense that women are unseen. Ermiza is saying women are not heard. So these are unheard, unseen people. But women also make up half the population of any country, and it's absolutely insane that this should be so. When we look at the efforts that all of you have been making to improve the conditions of women through Muslim personal laws and family laws, in Malaysia and in Sri Lanka, you have codified laws, and they are still not working because of the patriarchy. Let's put it down to the patriarchy, squarely on the head of patriarchy. And even in, Malaysia is a Muslim majority country, Sri Lanka is a Muslim minority country. The situation is pretty much the same. In India and in South Africa, Muslim minority countries, and you are struggling in different ways to get yourself recognized and noticed that, hey, we're here, we actually exist. You're having to say this basically through your activism. As I was indicating, women have been mobilizing. Women are working hard to achieve justice and equality, justice, fairness, as Ayesha just so quickly just said it. I could tell that she's been saying this so many times, justice, fairness, equality, these are the things that we are looking for. I'm just thinking through, in all these contexts, the approach for reform has been kind of mixed. So Malaysia, I believe, approached this through comprehensive reform, and in some other contexts, there's been efforts to do piecemeal. Well, some do not have choice, as Noorjehan explained. These are like tidbits thrown at drawn to women, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time, it doesn't. Our focus today is which approach for reform actually works. So, firstly, I just wanted to ask Rozana. Sisters in Islam has made efforts to achieve comprehensive reform. And if you could share your experience of that effort, and how successful was it?
Yes, thank you very much, Humay. Definitely, Sisters in Islam was very inspired by the law reform that took place in Morocco. And I think that was something that we wanted to raise, to think that, because all the law reforms that we've been doing has been very much piecemeal. And we had actually embarked on this whole, what do you call this, putting for ourselves a Muslim family law reform to be presented and this is something that unfortunately we've not been able to do very, very successfully, because there's so much challenges that we're facing on the ground in terms of our context. One, we're having to deal with about 40 years of political Islam, where groups like Sisters in Islam are not seen as something that's a positive. Initially, there are people. Initially, I think we were a welcome breath of fresh air. There was a lot of excitement about groups that are actually women taking charge, women conveying and demanding the kind of justice they think needs to be seen, and the changes that needs to be seen in order for women to get justice. But I think this does not fit well with a lot of men, with a lot of patriarchal men, that women are actually, one, speaking out. Two, they keep shifting the goalposts in terms of, what kind of women can actually speak out. And they didn't think that, Sisters in Islam is probably the right group to be speaking out. And as a result of that, we've also, with this whole landscape of political Islam, we've also had a process of, increasing Islamization. We've also had a process of increasing bureaucratic Islam, bureaucracies of Islam. There's so many, you come to Malaysia, there's so many multiple religious authorities that you have to deal with at the federal level, at the state levels. And this becomes quite something that we have to navigate, because with regards to what groups like Sisters in Islam have also been lumped in as a negative force. We are feminists, we are liberals, we are pluralists. So these are seen as negative values, and so it definitely has put a spanner in the works, because we were working on the issue of Islamic family law reform. From we've had this big campaign going down to the ground, reaching out to the grassroots women from 2012, I think, to 2014. And what we wanted was to actually bring their voices, and have them engage with the lawmakers themselves. But it proved to be quite a challenge, because it was also at that time that, there was a fatwa issued against Sisters in Islam, So we are regarded as deviants because we subscribe to liberalism and religious pluralism. And this is something that we are still, battling in the courts. It's been like 2014 to up 6 years, coming up to 6 years, 7 years that we're dealing with this case. And it has affected, for example, our good name on the ground, whatever gains that we had made with the grassroots community, with the grassroots women particularly. And so then much of the work that we did in 2016 onwards was really having to deal with this whole, perception, about Sisters in Islam, and, trying to make sure that, our work with regards to family law, is still ongoing. So it's, I would say it's still something that's a challenge for us, because we are dealing with an environment that's very, very increasingly, more conservative. a lot of people are speaking up, to say things like, but child marriage is, allowed in Islam, so we're having to deal, at one point, the challenge was we only had to deal with religious authorities, all right? So it's, having to advocate to them. But now, interestingly, because of social media, there's the pros and cons to it. One, the pros is that, we are able to see for ourselves and hear for ourselves the people who are supporting us, right? But on the other hand, you're also having to deal then, with the individuals, with the non-state actors, with the conservative groups who do not agree with us. So the challenges have become, multiple. And that's where we're at. We're still hopeful. I mean, I don't think we can give up on this work. I don't think we can give up on ourselves as Muslim women, because this is not just for us. This is also for our daughters and for all the women around us. This is for Malaysians. Essentially, this is about Malaysian women. This is about Malaysian families. So if we want to see Malaysia as a country that is, moving ahead, forging ahead, family, a country that is happy, it's got to be grounded in families that are happy as well, in families and society that is rooted and grounded in rights, that they are secure in being able to do something and claim their rights if, there's an injustice happening within their lives. So that's where we're at. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges, but we're hopeful. We're not giving up. We're not going away. Try to shut us up. We're not shutting up.
We cannot. We don't have. It's not a choice. I don't think it's a choice, is it? You can't just go away. This is it. We have to deal with it, and I'm sure you will deal with it. Because you have prevailed for 40 years, 30, 40 years, and haven't been dealing with it. So the patriarchy is not also going to go away, but I think our numbers are growing, and we see social media. I think there is, like you say, pros and cons, but there's a degree of transparency as well. So the numbers can be seen. We have hope. We have young people who insist on equality and justice, and they do not tolerate the patriarchy either, just like us. So our numbers will not go down. In fact, it will go up, and that is where our hope lies. And I will come to Noorjehan next, actually. And just thinking, India is so complex, It's such a complex situation in India. Although you are a minority Muslim community, you are about several countries large, with about 150 million population, and the multi-religious and multicultural social diversity in India is just absolutely legendary. And so complex, and it's also beautiful in many ways. That diversity is so rich, and I think the work that you do, you will come across that. There is so much diversity in Islam. That is what we know from around the world, from looking at family law as well. I'm just thinking the way you have approached Muslim family law reform in India has been a kind of the two-pronged approach, which is you have gone for your model law, the comprehensive reform, seeking that kind of change, and also you have gone for small changes as well, specific issues. Could you share some insights with us into your experience using this two-pronged approach, Noorjehan?
Yeah, Humay, we really don't have a choice because since 2007, we've been working on a comprehensive draft law, and we took 7 years, went around the country, had consultations, and we came up with a draft law, comprehensive, as we say, and it's out there in the public domain since 2014. And we've been asking that this law needs to be just picked up. It's given to you ready-made. It's not perfect, definitely. It can be worked upon, but it's out there. Work on it and give us a comprehensive law. And with the same intention, so it's there with the state, with all stakeholders since last 7 years, and nothing is being done about it. We went to the Supreme Court in 2016 for a judgment against triple talaq, polygamy, and halala, all the three issues, because they are linked to each other. But what does the Supreme Court do? They just give us a judgment, a good judgment, only against triple divorce. Our second PIL against halala and polygamy is still sitting with the Supreme Court. I don't know when are they going to get into this mood to give us a judgment, right? So we want comprehensive, but what we get is, it depends on the mood of the government, the politics of the state, the mood of the Supreme Court. So so that is our problem. And what we get, piecemeal also, is so piecemeal really. Because if you look at just the divorce law that has come in 2019, if you look back to 1939, it was also a divorce law. It gave the right to Muslim women to go to the court and get a divorce for herself. What we got in 1986 was also partly a divorce law, because it was about maintenance post-divorce. Okay, now that came in 33 years back. What we get now is a law which says that don't divorce like this. Instant divorce is now criminalized. But how do we give a divorce? How do we, okay, I stopped doing instant divorce, but then tell me what's the best way to do it? Again, nothing on it. So the piecemeal also has to be comprehensive. If you're giving me a divorce law, then please make it comprehensive, because now what is happening is that khula instances have increased. Men are pressurizing women to give khula, and when she is claiming khula, then she has to forego her right. Now, that's part of the uncodified Sharia law. Polygamy has increased. And we've been in our comprehensive law saying that please, polygamy also needs to be put down. Halala needs to be put down. But we keep asking, but this is what we are getting. So our demand is, we need a comprehensive legislation now. You give us a comprehensive legislation. This is our draft law, and you please work on it and see that we get a law. Another 16 years and it's going to be 1 century. It's going to be these many decades and we will be still without a law. And it's a shame on our community. It's a shame on our so-called social political leaders. It's a shame on the state. Irrespective of political parties, they have so purposefully neglected the legal demands of, 150 million, 80 million Muslim women are out of the ambit of state security. And that's a shame. What has happened as a challenge before us is the complete politicization of the issue. So various governments have used it for their own purposes. So earlier governments were hand in gloves with the religious groups, and they never touched upon the issue of personal law, never listened to Muslim women. They don't exist, as we know, we've spoken earlier. The current government is so clearly anti-Muslim, and the kind of lynchings and things that are happening across the country. And they gave us this law, and then they give us this law like in this little piece, and this government is also not listening. So we are in a state where this government is treating us as villains. It's treating us as terrorists, as treating us as people who are second-class citizens. But then you pick up the Muslim women's issue and you don't even give us a comprehensive law. You give us a part and a little part of it. So we are caught in this politicization. So sadly, the triple talaq legislation has become more about the Hindu right-wing government. It's become more about the Muslim men need to be protected against going to the jail. And it's got nothing to do with Muslim women. And we've worked all along to get out there and get something for ourselves. So how it's always that our issues, especially law reform issues, are so subverted so cleverly that it all stands against us. And for us, unfortunately, it is expected that the religious groups and the patriarchal groups like the board and the Jamaats will stand against us, and it is expected. But what is also a tragedy for us, and it is such a shame on the feminist movement in India, that we have 660 men and women who call themselves secular, feminists, academicians, lawyers, and people of standing in the community today saying that this legislation against triple divorce is an abomination. It's a charade and it has to go. And we as Muslim women stand here feeling that who's there to support us? The state is playing its politics. The larger religious groups, anyway, we don't expect much from them. The larger educated so-called intelligentsia of the community is quiet. And then we have this very robust secular feminist movement who's standing right against us and standing shoulder to shoulder with the most regressive groups. And this is where we struggle for a codified comprehensive law. And that's a big challenge before us.
Just the irony, just the irony that...
Sorry, Humay, your mic is not clear.
How does that sound? Is that better?
Could you pick it up a bit more?
How about that? I'm so sorry about this. Yeah, I'm so sorry about this. I was just going to say, the irony, listening to Noorjehan, the fact that you find yourself in such a small space, unsupported by others who you expect to have the openness, to understand the fight that you are fighting, the struggle that you are going through. It is ironic when it comes to the politics of these things. I think there is a pattern already, just after listening to Rozana, after listening to you, and also seeing what's happening in the Maldives. We see a pattern here. There is this politicization of religious issues and the patriarchal capture of these issues for their political benefits. So we've been talking about who are the beneficiaries of these things, and I think perhaps we can safely say there is so much power play using these huge social issues towards political ends, and it actually has no winners, in my opinion. It really has no winners, because at the end of the day, an unstable society does not provide opportunities for anyone. Which actually brings me to Ermiza. You have been full on with your demands for comprehensive reform, right? And I think that you need to apologize to nobody about that. I absolutely love. I've been reading the demands that you have been making, and it's brilliant. Could you tell us, why you have chosen to go into that approach of full-on comprehensive reform demands?
Thanks, Humay. I think when MPL-REG, sort of the Muslim Personal Law Reform Action Group, started its journey, it was based on a research that was done into trying to understand the problems faced by Muslim women across the country, and also to understand what the challenges to reform was. And in that journey, in trying to understand issues, one of the first advocacy documents that we developed was the Women's Demands document. So we listed out the problems, and immediately next to it, we listed out what we had discussed with women to be the solutions that they ideally wanted to see. So there was a document that would guide our advocacy from that point onwards. It was an attempt to clearly articulate what the demands were. And when we went forward, discussing these demands with other women, other women's groups, political parties, community groups, there were so many debates about what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize practical experience? Do you prioritize compromise for possible quick gains? Or do you prioritize principles over everything else? And that debate of competing interests was really fascinating to understand where everyone was coming to this debate. Okay? So for MPL-REG, we always felt that every story that we heard touched so many different issues. So let me give you an example. We heard from, let's say, a person who I will call Reena, and her case study is up on the MPL-REG Facebook site as well as a case study. 17 years old, married without her consent or her presence at the marriage ceremony. Husband turned out to be an alcoholic who had severe anger management issues, beat her, particularly also during times of her pregnancy. She lost 3 babies prematurely. 2 sons survived. One day he gets angry. He also did not provide for their family. One day he got so angry that she had sent their young son to her family's house in search of food that he set her on fire. He was arrested, imprisoned, and she sought a divorce and got it. 6 months after he was released from prison, he comes back looking for her, and the community and certain members from the mosque force her to marry him again. More physical violence ensues, divorce again, and at the second divorce proceedings, she learns that he has married before. So she now becomes a second wife. She does manage to get a divorce. A one-off small idda payment is made, and thereafter no support for the children. So this one case is a case of child marriage, a case of forced marriage, no consent, no participation, abuse of permission to be polygamous, financially left destitute and burdened as a result of marriage, and domestic violence. So we kept seeing this pattern of sort of interconnectedness between the issues. Interconnectedness also then meant for us there was interconnectedness for the solutions. And we were set on a path of demanding for comprehensive reforms. Ours was not a path of compromising on values. Values was what we strongly believed, that it was Islamic what we demanded for, that it was in compliance with the constitution, and it was adhering to international laws. And all of those were acknowledged in the demands. The advocacy framework had those 4 sectors: lived reality, international law, Islamic jurisprudence, and domestic law. So what we were demanding in a sense then, in comprehensive demands, was full realization of rights, full restoration of dignity, full acknowledgement of autonomy of Muslim women in Sri Lanka. Personally, I think it helped us. It helped also women, women's groups, and also the broader public to envision what was possible, and that it is reasonable to ask for full dignity, to insist on full dignity. It put to shame the broken record of our community that said our community is not ready for these rights. It's something that we often heard. Oh, our community is not ready. Our women are not ready to have these rights given to them. They're not ready to become qazis. Sometimes decades of denial and discrimination means that we think that we are asking for too much when we are asking for near equality. The comprehensive demands inspired hope. I think comprehensive demands inspired visions of what is possible and gave us permission to think, to believe, and to ask for everything that we wanted. So in the last year, we've seen significant, unprecedented space for reform. And I think that's what you were referring to, Humay, when you said we've been full on. It's a testament to years of advocacy by generations of Muslim women activists in Sri Lanka. There was a time when we didn't hear any politician speak or champion reform for the benefit of people. 6 committees, 40 years later, we have had no reform on the table. Today, for the first time, we have a Minister of Justice who speaks and publicly assures the Sri Lankan people that the MMDA will be reformed. He also assures us that the demands of Muslim women will be heard. And there is on the table a broad agenda of family law reform on the way. So we really have hope, and it is strong hope indeed. It is significant to have this type of government commitment on an issue that affects people in their daily lives. Marriage, family disputes, maintenance, divorce affect all of us in our daily lives. And not looking for solutions is, to put it quite bluntly, an abdication of the responsibilities of government. We elect people into power to solve problems, not to ignore them. We are always conscious, and as Noorjehan said, we are conscious that the socio-political context in Sri Lanka, particularly relating to Muslim minority community that we are, is very fragile and is hostile at times. But we firmly believe that there is no bad time to advocate for what is right. So people affected realize change is possible. I get calls saying, has it changed? Has the law changed? When can I file my case under the new law? And that is hope. And I'm really inspired by that hope. And I really hope that there is something to show for this at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Has been doing great job.
Humay, your mic. I'm so sorry. Can't hear anything.
Okay. So sorry. I hope that's better. I was just saying that no. Better? Okay. Hyshyama, I think he might take on because this is not working out so well. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
We also don't have a great deal of time. I'd like to go to Ayesha briefly, though. Please go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So Ayesha, coming to you, let me just quickly gather Humay's question. Oops. Okay. So as mentioned previously, can you explain to us MPL Network's approach to reform in South Africa? And are you also considering a more holistic approach to reforms in terms of codified law that applies to Muslim communities? And are there opportunities for reforms right now? And perhaps there's some good news that you got yesterday on this issue. If you could share with us, that would be great.
Thanks for that question, Hesh. So, yeah, MPL Network's approach to reform, it is a holistic approach because our approach is informed by counselors, social workers, psychologists, Islamic law experts, attorneys, researchers. So we have a diverse group of women who are part of the network and contribute to our what it is that we're doing. The lived experience is also a really important aspect which guides us in our work. And we have held over the last 3 years, 2018, 19, and 20, roundtable discussions in various parts of the country so that we can gauge from the different areas, geographical areas, what the actual problem on the ground is. And that has guided us in when we've had to do submissions. You've asked are there opportunities for reform? Yes, there are currently 2 parallel processes which are running with the Department of Home Affairs and the South African Law Reform Commission on the new legislation. Will it be a single statute which governs all marriages, or will we have an omnibus where there will be different chapters which would deal with different religions or different types of marriages? The MPL network has also submitted, with the help of Musawah, a shadow report to CEDAW, and we have used that report in our submissions to the Law Reform Commission and to the Department of Home Affairs. We've highlighted, some of the cases case studies that we've used in our reform, in our submissions. We are looking for some form of legislation, some legal framework, some certainty for our women and children, because as it currently stands, there is no certainty for us. So we have that's what we've done. The approach has been holistic, looking at all aspects: marriage, divorce, and inheritance, asking for some form of legislation, and we have been ardent supporters of the Women's Legal Centre and their application at the court to compel the state to either amend current legislation or enact new legislation which protects the rights of Muslim women and children. So in 2018, the High Court handed down a judgment which then went on appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal. We've had, in terms of that order, there was interim relief. It was firstly found that the Marriage and Divorce Act is unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court of Appeal gave interim relief, which deemed Muslim marriages as out of community of property in the absence of any agreement to the contrary. So if there was an antenuptial contract or any form of agreement that you could prove that it wasn't out of community, there was at least some relief. So yesterday was the hearing at our apex court, at the Constitutional Court, where it was the Constitutional Court is tasked to confirm the Supreme Court of Appeal's interim relief on the unconstitutionality of those two pieces of legislation, and also the advocate for the Women's Legal Center argued that the interim relief needs to be retrospective, because the judgment, the Supreme Court of Appeal said it was not retrospective for any matter that was not yet for any matter that was not yet at the court before the 18th of after the 18th of December. So if somebody got divorced on the 19th of December, it would not apply to them. So only if your matter was already in court, in the process, then it would apply to you. So we're waiting and we're hoping, some of us on the network, for our personal, matters, we're hoping that this judgment is going to be retrospective, at least to a certain point. I don't know. They're saying, it's going to be unfair to go back 20, 30 years, but I don't know. It didn't take them very long. It didn't take the state very long to enact legislation for the recognition of customary marriages, which, governs African marriages and Civil Unions Act and things. So I don't know. I'm hoping that I'm very hopeful that, the outcome of this hearing, of yesterday's hearing, will be positive and will be what is needed.
Thank you so much, Ayesha. I think it's fabulous that there are pockets and pieces, and in some instances quite a bit in terms of opportunity for reform. And I love that this conversation has moved from so much pain to so much discrimination, and the fact that we are discriminated in so many aspects of marriage and family, all the way to the fact that there are movements, there are women's groups, there's activism that's happening. Muslim women are claiming our rights for ourselves, standing within our faith. And that we are moving towards some sort of reform. We're capitalizing on our context. We are working with our context. We're trying to change both our context and our culture. We are, as mothers, as wives, as daughters, also trying to change family dynamics. We are seeking justice for ourselves as women who are affected directly by these laws. But most importantly, we as a collective are also speaking up for justice. And this brings me perfectly to the last segment. And unfortunately, I only have a minute for each of you. But this segment is basically going to be on action. But I want to very quickly preface by saying, can you all, so let's start with Noorjehan. Can you all mention very quickly, in a minute or two, what is your call to action? What needs to happen in your context? What is your demand from your government? And what is your request or demand from the public? So those who want to engage with you, those who want to support your movement, what is your call to action for them? So what needs to happen in terms of the issue? What needs to happen in terms of engagement to push this issue forward? Noorjehan?
Yes. So our demand for a comprehensive legislation remains, and we are going to push onto the face of this government and all the stakeholders within the community and otherwise to keep talking about it. Just to keep talking about a comprehensive legislation itself is something which we will continue to do. But on hand, we have this triple talaq law that has come in. And our immediate action, which we have already begun, we did a press conference last week where we are asking the government to make amendments to this law, because while it is still very, very piecemeal, it has brought down the level of triple divorce instances in the country, and it has really curbed that instant divorce that was happening earlier. But as said earlier, it's not enough. We need to bring in arbitration into this law. Arbitration must be made mandatory. this law also must be amended in such a way that khula, mubara, and other methods of divorce, which are part of the Islamic Sharia, needs to be made part of this legislation. And third important amendment that we are asking is in the procedural law, that it has to be time bound, it must be implemented, the police, the courts, and all other state stakeholders must take onus, and they must with honesty and integrity and commitment implement this law on the ground, so that the Muslim women are able to benefit from it.
Thank you.
I think I managed.
Yes, perfect. Rozana?
Yes, so I think for sisters in Islam, there's three things. We want to be able to build the ground for comprehensive law reform. I think, getting the buy-in from the public, would be very important. And to also talk a little bit more in terms of, why comprehensive law reform is needed rather than piecemeal reform. At the same time, there are specific issues that still needs to be addressed. So for example, increasing the minimum age of marriage. So that is something that, we need to tackle, because there are more states that are becoming convinced. We really need to be able to, put an aim and target to have states change their laws on this, because the impact is really long-term. If we continue to allow child marriages, the impact will be long-term. And one of the things that we also need to look at is also, the kind of procedural laws and processes that's working or not working, for women seeking justice in courts. So, so on the one hand, there's really, it's also, dealing with this whole thing about changing the mindsets. And I think educating the public, bringing them up to speed in terms of what does family law look like in our country right now and where we want it to go to, and you can be part of this conversation. That is something that we've got to do. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that powerful call to action. Ayesha, over to you next.
Yeah, so for us, we ask our government not to expect consensus, to expect 100% consensus and then want to enact legislation is not fair. You need to do what's in the best interest of women and children who are really the disadvantaged and are being marginalized. And then as the religious authorities, who call to action would be, don't keep telling our sisters to sabr until they end up in their qabr. Help them, help them to access their rights, which are theirs. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And Ermiza, hoping and praying between now and December that Sri Lanka will see comprehensive reforms, but what needs to happen in order to ensure that?
Okay, so yes, really hoping and praying. The call to action from us to Sri Lankans is, sorry, I'm catching my throat also when I say this. It's MMDA reform now. That's the simple message to government in particular. No more delays, and I'm not even saying please at this point because there have been far too many delays. So no more delays. Be transparent about the legislative process and deliver on your commitments to people, not to sort of these political interests, not to forward your own personal interests, not to any of these things, but to people on the ground. So the recently concluded Let Her Sign campaign, if some of you all had seen it, really showcased that public support for reform. This is not the time to stay silent, is what I would say to everyone else in Sri Lanka and outside. For Sri Lanka, this is the time to advocate loudly, to insist firmly, and to not waver. We cannot keep quiet at this point. We have a law on the cusp. We just need to get it passed. So this is not the time to be quiet. This is the time to insist that reform should be guided by values of equality, non-discrimination, dignity, and non-violence. Those are the guiding principles that we want to see reform on, no other interests. This is the time to say that reform must not be dictated to by narrow political agendas, by patriarchal values that will continue to oppress or silence, and will also not be dictated to by nationalist majoritarian interests, narrow interests, right? So we say to everyone who wants to see change, play your part now. Talk about reform in your families, in your spaces of influence. Reach out to your representatives and harass them. Say, we get this done now, right? And this is the need of the hour. Share MMDA reform material, and the public really must declare that support and demonstrate to politicians and help them feel strong and help them feel that they're doing what the public wants and that we value equality both within the Muslim community, as a Muslim community vis-a-vis a majority community, but also within the Muslim community amongst ourselves, women and men and children as well. That's the call.
Thank you, Ermiza. Goosebumps, really. Thank you to everyone here, all the speakers. We really have an awe-inspiring panel. Yes, Humay, please go ahead if you can. No. But can you, let's type it on the chat, Humay. I'm so sorry. But it's power to everyone. Thank you. Yes, power to everyone. Thank you, Humay, for moderating the better part of segment 2, which is fantastic. Thank you to the speakers and to everyone who joined us today for this really exciting conversation. I have goosebumps hearing the calls to action, and certainly this is not going to be one of your usual webinars. It's going to end when the video ends. This is part of a series, so please do follow us on social media. Follow all the activists and their groups on social media, because we will be putting out these very same calls to action as advocacy in the coming days and weeks, as well as part of the campaign, as part of our attempts to lift each other's work up and amplify the reforms efforts that are happening. Thank you so much to the Musawah team on the back end. It's been an incredible journey to even put this together in terms of conceptualizing what a series looks like. And we really hope we're coming to Twitter Spaces for all you folks on Twitter. We're not coming to Clubhouse, so no. but inshallah, we'll also take up Instagram and Facebook in future advocacy initiatives as well. So we are going to be a cross-platform digital series. And as promised, I'm going to end very quickly with why we chose Standing for Justice as the series title. It might sound familiar to you, but as Asma Lamrabat in her chapter on the groundbreaking book Men in Charge, which Musawah published, basically outlined that the word kiwama, which is commonly translated as male authority over women, has been one of the key concepts that have shaped Muslim legal tradition and Muslim jurisprudence. And it's also one of the key concepts that has ended up in our family laws, which with discriminatory provisions and practices as we see today and as we've spoken throughout today's event and in our journey for reforms. But interestingly, Asma notes that kiwama, the term, the word, or the concept, comes from the term kawamun or kawamin, which is derived from the root word kama, which has multiple meanings, mostly to mean rise up, take on, stand up, and endure. So in fact, it's not patriarchal. And the mind-blowing fact is that 2 out of 3 verses in the Quran in which the term kawamin is used is in Surah 4, verse 135, and Surah 5, verse 8. And in both instances, kanu kawamin has been used to imply standing out firmly for justice. So here we are, taking the pain, the discrimination, the root of patriarchy, the misinterpretations in our jurisprudence, and following the Quranic order to stand firm for justice in our laws and policies and practices that affect our lives as Muslim women. Thank you so much for listening to this conversation. Thank you so much for being part of the journey. And please do pursue those calls to action and amplify our work going forward, and all the advocates and their work going forward. So hope you have a really great evening. And hope to see you soon in the next set of events that we have lined up for you this year and next year, inshallah. Thanks, everyone.